Good day. Welcome to my final resting place. I am Nancy Blackshere of the Pennsylvania Dunaways. Now, I wasn't part of your community for very long, just 5 years. While I was alive, I mean, I've literally been a part of your community for a very long time. I came here in 1860 to a rough and tumble frontier town. There wasn't much in the way of culture or commerce. Well, there wasn't much in the way of anything when I got here. So you're probably saying to yourselves, why would such a smart-looking woman leave the heritage and the culture and the beauty of Pennsylvania to come out west? And in those days, we did consider Iowa to be part of the West. Well, the reason is simple, and I can explain it to you in 2 words. Aaron Blackshere. Mr. Blackshere was born in 1827. He was a native Pennsylvanian. He was brought up on a farm and received his education in the subscription schools, which were quite in vogue at the time. At the age of 22, he set out for the West to secure a location for his future. In 1856, he returned to Iowa. He settled in Fort Dodge. 4 years later, he returned to Pennsylvania to make me his bride. After the wedding, we immediately left Pennsylvania and came here to Fort Dodge, where we lived together until my decease in 1865. Now, why did I follow this man to Iowa? Well, Mr. Blackshere was a kind and genial gentleman. He was a friend of education. He was a strong advocate of temperance, and he took a lively interest in all things pertaining to the public good. And he was a successful businessman, a perfect prospect for a husband. Now, while my time here was short, his time was practically legendary. Mr. Blackshere and his partners, Henry Carse and Francis E. Beers, were the men behind the saga of the Charles Rogers, the little steamboat that chugged its way from Keokuk to Des Moines to Fort Dodge in the summer of 1859. My husband was the chief financial officer and president of the Fort Dodge Navigation Company. Mr. Carse was a secretary-treasurer and served as a clerk on the boat, and Mr. Beers was a building supervisor, and he was the pilot of the Charles Rogers. Now, excuse me for a moment. I generally find newspaper people to be verbose and annoying, but several years after the trip, my husband and his partners were written about in this manner, and I quote, "Their exploits have become almost legendary. With their ability to meet the unending series of reversals and crises and disasters, they seemed like modern Ulysses. No, more like nautical Paul Bunyans, as by dint of little more than muscle and bone they made their way down the Ohio, from Pittsburgh to Cincinnati to St. Louis, then up the Mississippi to Keokuk, and continuing up the Des Moines River. Finally, in 1859, traveling from the Des Moines River to Fort Dodge, opening the river to steamboat traffic for the first time. An epic-making feat, it said." Now, why was a simple steamboat trip up the river such a remarkable feat? Well, at that time there was a growing number of settlers arriving here in the Des Moines River Valley, and there was a growing need for cheap and easy transportation, such as the river could afford. And the Des Moines, by the way, was the only Iowa stream on which steamboat traffic was developed to any extent. Now, because of the trip, well, you have to realize that travel by steamboat, their safety record was horrific. There were natural disasters, there were man-made disasters, and really traveling by steamboat was a bad idea. But it turned out to be a good idea for them, because in 1859 there were heavy rains, and those rains made it a boss year for steamboating up the river. So on April 4th, after weathering a series of, there were monetary crises, there were natural disasters, there were treacherous conditions, there was an incompetent crew, they finally took the Charles Rogers, which had been built in Pittsburgh and named for its builder, out from Des Moines, and 2 days later it snorted up to the Fort Dodge levee. Now, you're still probably thinking she's making a big deal of this trip because her husband was instrumental in its success. And he was. However, no less a man than John F. Duncombe himself said the arrival of the Charles Rogers will be, and I'm quoting, "remembered by many of our citizens with extreme delight for many years to come." Now, Mr. Duncombe could also have been a newspaper person because he went on and on and on, but he finally got to the point, which is that the Charles Rogers passed over the rapids at the mouth of Soldier Creek, where the river divides into two separate channels. At the mouth of the Lizard, Mr. Duncombe said, the boat rounded to and passed with racehorse speed into the eastern channel. Hurrahs arose from people on the boat and on the shore, he said. I liked that part. Because of the Charles Rogers trip, a petition was prepared asking the state legislature to strike down that unconstitutional law that declared the Des Moines navigable only as far as the capital city. The Charles Rogers made 4 more trips to Des Moines before low water forced her from the trade. Now, a combination of low water, the use of many of our steamboats by our Union forces down south, and then after the Civil War, the arrival of the railroad here in Fort Dodge turned Fort Dodge's attention to other market routes. But in 1859, my then future husband and his partners were huckleberries above a persimmon. They were men of audacity and vision and success, and that's the man who came to Pennsylvania and asked me to marry him. How could I say no? I came with him to Fort Dodge, and in 5 years of our marriage, I bore him 3 children. Our son died in infancy, but our 2 daughters grew to be fine women with families of their own. So while my contribution may not be historic or legendary, it suited me just fine. Thank you for listening to my story.
Thank you.